Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight I want to welcome Michael Mazzola. He is an award-winning filmmaker that started making documentaries in middle school and became interested in UFOs and conspiracies while studying film at NYU. He then went on to direct Dr. Greer's worldwide hit Unacknowledged and the highly rated documentary Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, Contact Has Begun, which is available now. Michael, how are you tonight?
I'm all right. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much for joining us. Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind was a fascinating documentary. I believe anyone who is curious or even skeptical, I encourage them to go watch this. Dr. Greer touches on so many aspects of the phenomenon that I believe are intentionally suppressed by the government, media, and other deep state factions to instill fear of extraterrestrials, and have been trying to establish that they are a threat to humanity. And I also believe that the true, real disclosure is not going to come from our government, but it's ultimately up to us. Tonight, I want to start with a little bit more about yourself, your background, and how did you get involved with Dr. Greer?
Good question. So a lot of people get involved with this space because they see a UFO, or they've had a near-death experience, or, you know, some kind of mystical experience like that. But I was actually totally the opposite. I was a hardcore atheist and skeptic, and I loved debunking the paranormal. I would get into arguments with people, and I would, trash the whole idea of UFOs or aliens or an afterlife or psychic phenomena or anything like that. And I had other friends who were skeptics, and they would say, I wish I could believe in this stuff, but I just don't see the evidence. And I would say, I don't know why you would want to believe in this stuff. I'm glad it's not real. I'm glad it's not true. It would be terrible if there were aliens and and our thoughts could affect reality. Like that's just so messy. I'm very happy with my materialist reductionist sort of paradigm. And then, of course, I started looking at arguments against my position because I wanted to be able to beat anybody in a debate. And the moment I looked at arguments against my position totally collapsed. And I realized that I was completely wrong. And then, I had to ask myself, well, why is it that I wasn't just not convinced, but I was very much biased against this being real. Why did I not want this stuff to be real? And the best answer I could come up with was, if this stuff is real, you have to take responsibility for that information. If there really are ETs and there's really a conspiracy to cover it up, I mean, I have some kind of obligation to speak about that. If our thoughts really do create reality, then I have to take responsibility for my thoughts, for my own happiness. I'm no longer sort of the victim of circumstance in a cold and personal universe. And I think we as a community severely underestimate how big of an obstacle that is for a lot of people. We think that everyone wants this stuff to be real, but that they're just not convinced. They need to see a little bit more evidence. Let's show them a document or a photograph or a documentary, and that'll win them over. I think that with a lot of people, you're dealing with their resistance is not coming from a lack of evidence. It's coming from a fear of the responsibility that you have to take once you accept all this stuff. So to answer your question, finally, the way I took responsibility for it was to, volunteer to make films and get involved in that way. And so when I found out that Greer was looking for someone to make Unacknowledged, I threw my hat in the ring and ended up getting selected, and that was it.
It's amazing. Now, I wanted to go back because you said that you were a complete skeptic and that you got proven wrong, basically. Was there anything in particular that kind of proved you wrong, or was it just your own research and how much research you were doing at the time?
Yeah, so I don't remember anything specific, like any one specific thing for the ET issue that convinced me. Um, for the psychic stuff, it was reading Dean Radin's books, The Conscious Universe, and there's another one, Entangled Minds, I think. Um, and then, reading arguments against his arguments, and then reading arguments against those arguments, but very quickly realizing that the skeptic's position was really disingenuous, and that these people aren't skeptics at all. They're really just cynical debunkers. And now being able to sort of step back and see both sides of this, having been on both sides of this, I realized just how not skeptical the skeptics are, right? So they're not skeptical of the mainstream media. They're not skeptical of the establishment in science or academia. They're not skeptical of their favorite politicians. They're really just apologists for the establishment, and it's really disappointing. It's kind of embarrassing that I was one of them for such a long time.
Now, tell us a little bit about what it was like working with Dr. Greer.
Definitely really, really intense. When I first connected with him to discuss his vision for Unacknowledged, which was the first movie we did, it was clear to us that, Unacknowledged was the right movie for that moment in time and where people were. But the film he always dreamt of making was this new one, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. And we designed Unacknowledged to be sort of the disclosure potty training that everyone needed in order to get to the real stuff we wanted to talk about, which is the new one. But, with Dr. Greer, you're talking about someone who has just been through the most unbelievable trauma, trying to bring this stuff out, and has come up against so many people trying to, either stop him or twist what he's doing or undermine it in various ways. So we definitely had processes in place to make sure that while I was handling the creative aspects and how the story was being told, that, everything was fact-checked, that especially when it came to the photos and videos, everything was personally vetted by Steve. We had to track down the provenance of every shot and, okay, who filmed it? What do we know about this person? Do we have a relationship with them? Can we trust them? It was very, he put in place standards that forced all of us to be extremely meticulous with everything. And I hope it shows in the final product.
Yeah, it was definitely amazing. Now, from what I hear, Dr. Greer, he really didn't want to go in the direction of working with, I guess, various intelligence agencies. He was kind of dragged into that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's true. That was actually really surprising when I met him, because I thought, I knew him because of the Disclosure Project and all of that. But what the real story is that, he was very content with his medical career, and on the side, he was teaching people how to do the CE5 stuff and how to make contact. And, people in government got wind of this and basically, said, who do you think you are? You can't do this. And then he started getting requests from the head of intelligence for the DIA, wanting a briefing. And he had always naively assumed that, the head of the CIA or the DIA and the president, they know all about this stuff. They're handling it. He didn't know that there was this giant constitutional crisis. And so that's kind of how he got sucked into it. And, basically it got to the point where he was told, we can't do this because we're going to end up like JFK, but you can do it because basically you're expendable, and he took it on, and it's been a big burden for him. He's paid a big price for doing it. So I thank him for it.
Now, as far as close encounters of the first through fifth kind, for those that aren't familiar, could you kind of run through each of those and explain what they are?
Yeah, of course. So the first kind is when you see a UFO up in the sky. The second kind would be if there's some kind of physical trace that's left behind, like a crop circle, something like that. The third kind is when you see the occupant of the craft, so you'd actually see an extraterrestrial being. And that's where the movie title comes from, the Spielberg film, and that was based on a real event. And then the fourth kind would be when you're taken on board an ET craft. And then the fifth kind, which was coined by Dr. Greer, is human-initiated contact.
Now, when it comes to human-initiated contact, could you kind of go over what, I guess, the basic protocols would be if for one to, I guess, make contact with an extraterrestrial race or civilization?
Yeah, of course. So I'll give you a little background and context, because there's kind of a lot to unpack with it, but I'll give you the shortest version that I can. If you were to read, I'll put it this way, first of all, and we say this in the opening moments of the film, if you want to understand ETs and you want to integrate, the reality of extraterrestrials into your worldview, we have to upgrade our worldview and our understanding of reality to allow this phenomenon to exist, right? So one of the main problems with all of this skepticism and debunking and denial is that we're still stuck in this materialist paradigm. And the materialist worldview basically says that everything is just, dead matter, a human being is $6 worth of chemicals, add water and mix, and your consciousness that you experience is just, it's a side effect of your brain, a side effect of evolution. It's what they would call an epiphenomenon, and it's just an illusion that you're experiencing. And so when we're in that paradigm, we cannot make sense of ETs. And if we admit that ETs are real at all, we're going to totally misinterpret the phenomenon. We're going to interpret it as a threat. We're going to make a lot of mistakes because we're beginning with what we would argue are incorrect assumptions about how reality works. So the paradigm in which all of this stuff begins to make sense is one where we realize that consciousness is not an illusion. It's not just the result of your brain, but consciousness is actually the basis of all reality. And it's not that consciousness comes out of matter, but kind of the other way around, that matter is kind of condensed consciousness, and that all of us, you and me and everyone listening to this and everyone and everything around us, are deeply interconnected through this field of consciousness. Now, right now, you have revolutions taking place in physics, medicine, philosophy, biology. All of these fields are converging on this point, which is consciousness, and they're having to radically readdress their long-held assumptions, and they're embracing the kind of worldview that I'm describing here. A worldview in which not only is our conscious experience real, but now things like telepathy, psychic phenomenon, can actually begin to make sense because we know these things are real, and it's completely irrational to deny them. Okay, I know this is like a long preface, but I've got to get it all in order to answer your question, right?
Yeah, it's perfect. Go ahead.
So, one of the best books you could ever read is Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. This is the only book that Steve Jobs kept on his iPad. He read it every year. He gave it to everyone at his funeral. And, this is, and there are other similar books out there that discuss this stuff, but there's it goes into great depth about the kinds of abilities that begin to manifest in someone who is practicing these meditative and yogic techniques for a long time. You hear about these great yoga masters in India, and, after 30 years meditating in a cave, what happens? They're telepathic, they can levitate, they can dematerialize, rematerialize, teleport, bilocate. Well, what do UFOs do, right? They're teleporting, dematerializing, rematerializing, they're levitating, they're bilocating, and they're communicating with people, if we believe their reports, telepathically. So what's going on here? So if you're talking about a civilization that is, 1 billion years more advanced than us, spiritually, not just technologically, they've developed these abilities that I described that, but it's to the point where now they begin to manifest technologically, right? So in the, the ancient Vedic term for this would be the siddhis, S-I-D-D-H-I-S. These are these kinds of abilities. And this is the same kind of phenomenon we observe in UFOs. These are, you're dealing with civilizations where their technology and their consciousness are integrated. If we took, you talk to these military guys who go out on these crash retrieval teams, and they bring back UFOs for us to study. And if they look at the metal under a microscope, it's so pure that we could not replicate it even in a vacuum in space. And that is because these UFOs are not being manufactured on like a Ford assembly line on another planet the way we would manufacture something. They're literally being manifested, for lack of a better term. I'm sure Dr. Greer could describe this better than I can. But they're literally being manifested through this sort of consciousness technology, fusion that these civilizations have developed. So now to answer your question, well, what is CE5 and how does it work? When you understand that you're dealing with civilizations whose consciousness and technology are integrated, the way you initiate contact is to send an intention that is clear and coherent enough that they and their technology can pick up on it, and then they can choose to accept that invitation and come and materialize in front of you. Now, for most people, we're not going to be able to just send an intention that is just like that clear and coherent. Most of us have rats in our brain, right? So, the protocols that Dr. Greer developed, involve things like meditation, sort of calm the mind, get you into a really coherent state, and then using remote viewing to sense where they might be, and then, using this trilogy of light and sounds and intention to, put out this invitation. And it's going to be very, very effective for most people. You don't have to be meditating in a cave for 30 years. You have people who've never done this before, never meditated, and they just, they get the instructions off YouTube, or they get the app or whatever, and they're having mind-blowing, life-changing experiences the first time they do it. So I hope that explanation makes sense. I know it was very long. I'm sorry that it was.
Oh, no, that's fascinating. Now, when it comes to these beings, you say things like, civilizations. When I think it's an ongoing sort of debate or argument between a lot of UFO researchers, whether these beings are physical, have they come from different galaxies across the universe? Are they interdimensional? Are they there all the time, just beyond our spectrum of view? Are they from different times? Are they time travelers? There's so many different theories on what these beings are, and I personally believe it could be a mix of everything. I think that everything could be connected. I think that they could be interdimensional, they could be extra dimensional, they could be physically coming here from other galaxies. But I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So, if you're an alien hunter, everything's an alien. If you're a ghost hunter, everything's a ghost. If you're an exorcist, everything is a demon trying to deceive you, and and so on and so forth. And so, people tend to put everything into one bucket based on what their what sort of field they're working in. And the truth is that all of these different kinds of phenomena exist. There are definitely higher dimensional, higher vibrational beings that some people would call angels. Those are absolutely real. There are definitely dark interdimensional beings that some people would call demons, or reptilians, or whatever. And those are scary and dangerous. That's not what we're talking about when we say extraterrestrials. When we say extraterrestrials, we're talking about, biological beings from other planets within the third dimension. However, the reason it all gets lumped together and confused together, and people confuse an ET for an angel or a demon or for a ghost or whatever, is that, and we touch on this in the film, but it's good to unpack it. If you're talking about a civilization light years away, the speed of light, take them 1,000,000 years to get here. It would take them 1,000,000 years to send a communication back, right? So in order to be interstellar, you have to be transdimensional. They're, bending the fabric of space-time in order to dematerialize and rematerialize. They're not traveling in a linear way. And so when they're stepping into our dimension, they can partially materialize in a way where they appear to be etheric beings. Or I should say, depending on their level of spiritual development, and again, go back and look at what the ancient yogis and the Buddhists wrote about what happens to you as you reach these higher and higher levels of consciousness, and what that kind of civilization might look like. They could be almost indistinguishable from something like an angel at that point, but they still are technically, extraterrestrials. So, there's all kinds of phenomena, and, everyone does themselves a big disservice when they put it all in one bucket. I hope that makes sense.
Does. Now, I want to get into a little bit of the disinformation campaign that has been ongoing. I mean, you can take it back to after World War II with the formation of the CIA, of making extraterrestrials seem to be a threat. Now, what are your overall thoughts on the reasonings why? I have my own thoughts, to keep some of this technology for themselves that they could possibly have found or recovered and been reverse engineering. Also, if we knew the powers of our own consciousness, they would have less power. That's just a couple of, the reasons that I believe that the disinformation campaign may have been started. But what are your thoughts?
No, you're absolutely right. When we first encountered this stuff, Danny Sheehan is such a genius. He's the attorney, the constitutional attorney who participated in the films, and he's such a genius at understanding the kind of national security state mentality that's been dominating this stuff. But, when we first encountered this stuff, of course, automatically we say, well, this is probably a threat. However, we know from the Disclosure Project witnesses and from our our high level sources, as well as from our own experiences, through 3 decades of CE5 ambassadorship, we know, and the people in charge know, that they're not a threat. They're offering us a chance to evolve spiritually and technologically, but we'd have to get our, proverbial crap together as a species on this planet in order to be able to accept that invitation. So, but they're never going to admit that they know that, meaning that they're never going to admit that it's not a threat, because once you have something that you can point to as a threat, it's far too convenient. And, they're going to continue to use this to justify the macroeconomic order of the day, because number one, these technologies would totally, transform our energy and economic systems on this planet. We go into this in unacknowledged. It would completely dissolve the current power hierarchy on this planet. And, ultimately you can't have a national security state if you have a bunch of, liberated spiritual beings on this planet who can remote view what you're doing, and who, thanks to, ET technology, are all living like immortal billionaires. It would be the ultimate equalizer. And it would be amazing, but it would put these people out of business. And that's, ultimately terrifying to them. So it is a threat to the current, power status quo. And so that's why they've taken the position, and we know this from witnesses, and we know this from documents that we've released, that they're always going to deny that it's real until they can get to the point where they can't deny it anymore. And we've reached that point, and they're going to say, okay, it's real, but it's a threat. And so they've laid the groundwork through these, and we have a document that we published in Unacknowledged from the Psychological Warfare Strategy Board of the CIA, saying, hey, these flying saucers have, psychological warfare applications that we need to look into. And then we have Richard Doty, who was a counterintelligence agent, the Air Force, admitting what many other witnesses have told us, but they weren't willing to go on camera. He was just the first one to go on camera and confirm what we've been told or corroborate it. That, they've been doing these military abduction programs for decades to go out and scare the crap out of people. So, it's totally crazy. But if you look at it from the perspective of the national security state mentality, where it's all about preserving your own power, your dominion over other countries, and ultimately over other planets is what they want, it actually makes perfect sense.
Now, you mentioned the black projects where these dark factions are actually going out and abducting people. How much of these malevolent abduction experiences that people have do you think is actually our own black projects?
So that's such a good question. I don't know what percentage, but I would say it's going to be a significant percentage. This has been going on for a long time. And then you're also going to have a percentage where people are having terrifying experiences, but it's not necessarily intended to be a terrifying experience. So Travis Walton, Fire in the Sky was based on him. It absolutely traumatized me as a child. I had nightmares when I saw that movie. And, I think he actually passed away recently, didn't he? I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that.
Not that I know of.
Okay, don't quote me on that. But he, he's now every year at the conferences, talking about how the movie got it so wrong, and how, these ETs were actually trying to save his life, or they did save his life, because he ran at this thing like an idiot, and its energy field zapped him and killed him, and they brought him on board and they saved his life. But, a puppy being operated on by a vet doesn't know that the vet's trying to help it, right? It's just going to be a terrifying experience. So I think that's another category of these terrifying experiences, and that aren't necessarily really terrifying if you had the full context. And then, I'm not going to say that, there aren't people having genuinely terrifying, traumatizing experiences with real extraterrestrials. I mean, I just don't know. I can't possibly know that. But I think that it is less likely than a lot of people think. And, Greer gets so much criticism for saying, there's only good ETs. And it's like, well, he actually has a more nuanced position than that, because he'll be the first to tell you there's good and bad and everything. But there's going to be a baseline of decency and civility that you've got to reach in order to become an interstellar civilization. And that just makes sense, because, if the kinds of technologies that would allow you to travel from one star system to the next with unlimited energy and all of this stuff, if that kind of technology was in the hands of a species had a low level of consciousness, like say our level, they would have destroyed us, themselves, other ETs a long time ago. And we're just not seeing that. And in fact, we're shooting these things down, and we have yet to provoke some kind of attack. So they are showing this remarkable restraint that is certainly more than we would be showing. So that's why, obviously I can't speak for somebody else's abduction experience, but I would say that a great deal of them are definitely military psyop, operations. We know this happens all over the world. And then I'd say some of it, is just really scary, but it's not necessarily malicious interaction.
I'd like to get your thoughts on the To the Stars Academy and this sort of modern day government approved disclosure type thing that's going on.
Yeah, they're sucking all the air out of the room. And it's so frustrating. I see all these guys, building, they're like building fan bases on Twitter, all these TTSA fanboys. And look, I mean, yeah, it's validating on one level, but, we now have a whole generation of ufologists popping up on Twitter and Facebook and other places that have never even looked at the Disclosure Project witnesses, And like for me, that was the first place I went when I was discovering this stuff. You don't have to like, a lot of people don't like Dr. Greer. That's fine. That doesn't discount these senior military and intelligence officials, people who we trusted to run our nuclear facilities, who were brave enough to go on camera, and many of them had their lives destroyed as a result of it, regretted coming forward. These aren't people who are getting rich off of this. So, it's kind of like there's so much great research that's happened up to this point, and now no one's paying attention to it. Everyone's looking at TTSA like this is the first disclosure effort that's ever happened. And, taking things at face value that I think are pretty easy to debunk. We point out in the film, look at who these people are. You've got the former head of covert operations domestic for the CIA, which is unconstitutional. Jim Semivan was one of the co-founders of TTSA. And, and it's also exactly as Dr. Greer predicted 30 years ago, where they're coming out and saying, oh, it's the Advanced Aerial Threat Identification Program. Okay, it's real, but it's a threat. And we don't really know what these things are. We really need to start studying this, but they know exactly what they are. We have the witnesses, we have the documents to prove it. This was published 20 years ago by the Disclosure Project. We know exactly what this stuff is. So these people are totally lying. I don't think Lou Elizondo is a liar. I think he's operating off of what he was told in his tiny compartment. And he's smart enough to figure out, and I think he is figuring out, that he is being severely manipulated by the people around him who know a lot more than they say. People like Hal Puthoff and Chris Mellon and Jim Semivan. And, and Tom DeLonge is like the sweetest guy ever, who's totally doing it for the right reasons. And he's just being manipulated, in my opinion, because, the idea that the Pentagon was waiting for the moral leadership and vision of Tom DeLonge to finally do the right thing. Like, you have to be smoking crack to believe that. I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, yes, I agree with so much of what you said. Now, do you think well, let me put it this way. We know that we've been reverse engineering craft, and that we've most likely been involved with exotic off-planet materials, and we've been able to develop some fascinating technologies that, of course, the public won't know about. That being said, how much of that do you think was actually just discovered and reverse engineered, or do you think that we actually had contact, like some of these deep state factions actually had contact with extraterrestrials at some point, or even still do?
Oh, that's a really, really good question. And, it's definitely a combination of the two. I don't know what level of contact is going on now. I have to ask Dr. Greer. He's, people don't realize Dr. Greer is like super cautious about the stuff he says. And the stuff he publishes is like totally crazy, right? The stuff in our movies is totally crazy. But we can back up everything that we say with documents, multiple corroborating witnesses, or video evidence. If he's only got one source for something, he's not going to say it, even if it's the greatest source ever. Or if he can't publish any of his sources to back up what he's saying, he's not going to say it. So as a result, he's only talked about 5% of what he actually knows, because it's what he can back up and prove. And so, I know that there is definitely a permanent ET presence on this planet. The extent to which there's any kind of dialogue happening with people in government, I have no idea. I'd be skeptical of that happening, frankly. I'll have to defer to Dr. Greer and report back to you.
Now, you just said that you know that there's a permanent ET presence here on the planet. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so, there's a wonderful document. It's on the FBI website, and I'll dig it up. It's from like 1948, I think. I'll have to dig it up and send it to you. We show it briefly in Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, but they're describing one of these civilizations, and they're saying, these ETs don't come from another planet the way we would think of a planet out there, but they come from I'm quoting, an etheric planet that interpenetrates our own. And essentially, they're basically on Earth, but out of phase with our dimension. And they'll phase shift into our dimension and out. A lot of times when we have these CE5 teams and people making contact, there are these hot spots for contact, places like Mount Shasta, places where there are ET bases, but they're going to be out of phase with our dimension. So, yes, you do have civilizations that will show up in a CE5 that are coming from millions of light years away, and they're materializing right in front of us and then dematerializing, and they are coming from a distant star system. But some of them are coming from locations here on Earth, and they're merely stepping into our dimension and then leaving quickly. And that's why you see these hot spots. Point Magoo off of the coast of Malibu is another one.
I was about to say, we see these UFOs coming in at extreme speeds and then hitting the water at extreme speeds and just going down. And, there could be civilizations, in the ocean for all we know.
They absolutely exist. Yeah, they're absolutely there. So, but I'm not the expert on these things. Dr. Greer is. Unfortunately, I'm just the lowly filmmaker. So that's the extent of what I know on that.
Now, I'd like to talk a little bit more about some of the protocols such as meditation. Many people such as myself have a really hard time quieting the mind. And you mentioned, and Dr. Greer says that meditation is one of the best ways to get in contact. So for people like myself that have trouble quieting the mind and I've never been able to meditate, what kind of suggestions would you give?
So I'm the same way. And so I have to do a verbal chant or mantra and it sounds, you feel so stupid when you start doing it for like the first 2 minutes. It's like, just like, you're vocalizing this weird sound, but it calms your mind so quickly. And then after 10, 15 minutes of this, you're just totally present and zenned out. The one that I love is if you Google Wayne Dyer, if you remember him, Dr. Wayne Dyer, he does this one that's called the Ah meditation, A-H. And, as opposed to sitting there quietly trying to control your thoughts, you're doing something active. You're vocalizing this sound really loudly. And again, you'll feel stupid the first 1 or 2 minutes, and then halfway through, you're going to feel great. And by the end, you're going to feel like a Buddhist monk or something. And then try to do the CE5 meditation. You won't believe the transformation in just 20 minutes of sitting there making this sound. That's what I do. That's what my friends do. And it'll just take me from having rats in my brain to being totally calm and centered. And then I can really participate and enjoy, the CE5 protocols.
When you're trying to make contact, is it with any particular civilization, or are they mostly all benevolent, and just whatever one kind of you reach out to or connect with is the one that's going to kind of communicate back?
Yeah, they're totally benevolent. If they're connecting with you, you're talking about an interstellar civilization that can connect with you telepathically. This is a civilization that's reached a certain level of spiritual maturity in order to be able to do that. That's why no one has ever been harmed. No one's ever been abducted. Nothing like that has ever happened on one of these expeditions. And, people participate the first time because they want to see an alien. That's why I did it. I wanted to see something cool. I wanted to see a UFO, or I wanted to see a being actually materialize, which happens sometimes, by the way. But that's why people start. But the reason people end up doing it for years is because of the absolute transcendent states of consciousness that you experience. It is such an overwhelming feeling of connectedness and unconditional love. It is unmistakable that this is benevolent. If you participate in this, nobody could possibly convince you that this was in any way a threat, that it was, I was seeing a lot of, people in the Christian community are very upset about this movie, and they see it as a demonic deception, and, Dr. Greer just actually addressed this in an interview he did recently. And, he cited Monsignor Balducci, who was the senior theologian and exorcist at the Vatican, who said to Dr. Greer, I'm going to screw up the quote, but, he said, neither angels nor demons require flying saucers, So it's like, even this guy got it, if you're approaching this if you're approaching this at the right frequency, which is just, genuinely wanting to make contact, open and loving, and not afraid, you will have a contact experience, and you will be able to communicate with beings on that frequency, if that makes sense. You're not going to be attracting something terrifying.
Yes, that makes sense. And I'm sure you've noticed it's quite undeniable right now that there has been, and it's been bumped up, this mass awakening around the world right now. I mean, people are, seeing through things that they've never realized before. They're known they're being lied to about everything. I have close friends that I never thought would ask some of the questions that they're asking now. I mean, there's definitely a mass awakening going on around the world. Do you think that what's occurring right now, could possibly speed up our own disclosure, like the people's disclosure, and make it occur possibly even within our lifetime, to where it's a natural thing to communicate with extraterrestrials?
Absolutely. And if you would have asked me while we were making the film, which was just a few months ago, I would have said, man, and I did say it, I said, this movie is going to reach far fewer people than unacknowledged. This is real out there stuff. I don't know if people are ready. You know, I'm worried it's just going to stay in the CE5 community with people who are already into it, and they're going to love it, but it's never going to penetrate beyond that. That's really what I thought. You know, I'm like, wow, this movie's like really out there. And what we've seen, you know, not only has this message just like totally blown up and it's reaching a ridiculously wide audience that I just can't believe, but we are seeing what you just described, this total mass awakening. And it's like this lockdown has backfired in the most spectacular way because everyone's at home getting red pilled. You know, my old Sicilian father is sending me conspiracy videos on YouTube, and I'm like, what is going on? You know, this is so weird. You know, my mother is sending me Plandemic, and I'm like, what is this? You know, and she's like, Michael, I've got to show you, you know, this thing. You got to see what the Rockefellers wrote in 2012. I'm like, yeah, I've been trying to tell you about the Rockefellers forever, you know. So it's like, yeah, there's this really funny awakening. It's not funny. It's this amazing awakening that's happening. And so, you know, obviously, like, there's a lot of different narratives out there. And awakening is going to mean something different to a lot of people. So this is just, you know, it's not a sure thing, but it's a massive opportunity to, you know, not evangelize, but hold the space for your friends who are kind of experiencing this kind of existential vertigo with all this crazy information that they're seeing, and they don't know how to like process this. And so, you know, none of this stuff is really going to make sense in our old paradigm, our old materialist paradigm, where, you know, like I said, your $6 worth of chemicals, add water and mix, and, you know, the New York Times is a reliable source, and like all this stuff has to die. And it's up to us who have been doing this for a really long time to hold the space for people who are really, you know, feeling the burn right now with all this crazy stuff, and just show them the way, be patient with them, and also be an example that you can be an awakened person and not be like a crazy, you know, stressed out kind of like cokehead who wants to corner them and talk to them about the global conspiracy. You know what I mean? Like, you can be cool and happy and also be into this stuff, you know?
For the last few minutes that we have, earlier we talked about, well, I had mentioned how more researchers should you know, come together and share ideas on the extraterrestrial phenomenon instead of arguing over, you know, is it this phenomenon or is it this phenomenon, just to kind of bring the community together. And I think the link that is missing for a lot of researchers is consciousness. They're not connecting consciousness with the phenomenon, and it's such a part of you know, everything. And it's like you say, like Dr. Greer says through the whole documentary, that's the key, is our consciousness linking up to these civilizations, and that is how we're going to get the communication and disclosure. And I'd like you just to end on talking about that just a little bit more.
You absolutely nailed it. And, you know, I mean, I can hear the eyes rolling back. Oh, consciousness, it always comes back to consciousness, but it really does. You know, even if you're not interested in participating in CE5, and by the way, you totally should, because, you know, we made this movie to give you like a philosophical and scientific framework to understand these kinds of contact experiences. But like, if you understand this stuff conceptually, but don't actually participate in the experience, this film and all of this information is totally worthless to you. Like, it's 100% about the experience, and understanding it is the booby prize. So, you know, that's number one. But even if that's not your thing yet, you know, you literally cannot make sense of ET phenomenon unless we get rid of materialist metaphysics and replace it with a paradigm that allows consciousness to at least be real. Until we do that, our scientific community will remain backed into a corner where they have to basically, just say this phenomena is impossible, it's not happening, it's some kind of observational error, it's some kind of optical illusion, it's a camera effect, it's a fraud. It has to be fake because these things are impossible. Well, they're not impossible. And the problem is that, we're handcuffed by our materialist metaphysics, and it is already in its death throes all on its own, not because of the ET stuff. But we need to accelerate that as much as possible. And then we can have a much more intelligent conversation about ETs. It's the kind of conversation that Dr. Greer has been trying to have with all of us for a really, really long time. So I thank you for, supporting the film and having me on and getting the word out about these ideas, because, this is complicated stuff, and it does ask a lot of people, when we were designing, CE5, the movie, I was like, God, how are we going to do this? Like, to understand CE5, you have to understand things and then put them all together at the end, how are we going to do this? And we did the best we could. So, this kind of nuanced approach to the material, it asks a lot of people. If you want the really just like dumbed down popcorn version where you don't have to use your brain, go listen to Tom DeLonge and Lou Elizondo at TTSA, because, no thinking required. But, and I know it's kind of nasty, but it's kind of true. And we have to keep it in mind in this community that if we're going to talk to people about this, it's kind of what I opened with, right? You're asking a lot of people. You're asking a lot of people, and there's a lot of responsibility that comes with this information once you begin to accept it. So you've got to be patient and just be a great example.
Very well said. And I have the link in the description to Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, but just to let the audience know, if they want to go and watch it right now, what's the best way they can do it?
It's on iTunes, it's on Amazon, it's on Vimeo, few other places, and maybe in a few months it'll hit a streaming platform. We don't know yet. So in the meantime, it's available to rent or buy on the platforms we named.
Very good. Michael, thank you so much. That was awesome information. I'd love to have you back on in the future.
Oh, yeah, sure. Anytime, man.
All right. You have an excellent night.